Hello guys, today we're watching this guy called Goji Center is playing what would happen if -1 Godzilla nuke New York City. Now it would be bad, but we're gonna see what he says. Okay guys, so let's get right to the video.
You know, it's been a rare thing when just a few seconds of a character we already have seen before can raise so many questions in a teaser trailer. Today on Goji Center, we're going to be reaching back over half a century to speculate as to why Godzilla is in New York, what role humanity has in all of this, and the grim aftermath if Big G decided to take a bite out of the Big Apple. How much devastation are we talking at the scale he's at now? Stay till the end to find out. Special thanks to friend of the channel KJ McDougal, bringing up a few things that kick-started the research for this video. The teaser trailer for Godzilla -0 did plenty to show the sequel is going far more international than the first movie, making it clear who the countries are involved in the plot and that the target of Godzilla's fury might extend past Japan's shores. One important thing made light of was that the majority of this movie seems to be set in 1949, with a few sequences going back to 1947. And additionally, it seems to be heavily implied that the United States was also made aware of Operation Watatsumi and would have been close by to react, just in case things went south. And react how? Well, a little known fact about the Big Apple is that it used to be the central core of scientific research and development, both for the United States and numerous allied nations. In the 1940s USA, New York City was the epicenter of nuclear development especially, with Baker and Williams warehouses acting as storage for uranium materials, the Manhattan Engineer District HQ acting as the administrative hub, and Columbia University being the epicenter of research. There's a reason the project Oppenheimer and company were involved with was called the Manhattan Project after all.
Pretty sure Godzilla is there for bombs or for radiation to get more powerful, like Multiverse Godzilla, like he starts up energy, he gets stronger, pretty sure.
1947 to 1949 was a time of panic in a lot of places around the world, but America was no exception. Around the world, but America was no exception. The Communist Party in China had just recently effectively won their civil war, so from the US's perspective, they just went from one communist adversary to two. So the fact that they pushed even harder to research more devastating weapons, developments, and a cutting edge makes a lot of sense. In this cinematic timeline, this might come at a cost. They may not have been trying to do what a certain officer joked about doing in the American cut of the '84 film by weaponizing Godzilla.
I'd say put a uniform on him and sign him up.
But there certainly would be a lot of things they would want to figure out with how the monster worked to try and counter it. However, there is something about the infamous shot of Godzilla looming over the Statue of Liberty that has another dark connotation in and of itself. Lady Liberty was situated facing out, away from the city and towards the ocean, meant to welcome travelers and immigrants to a new life in the new world. For Godzilla to be walking in the direction he is, that means he is walking away from New York City. Now, he could simply be leaving without attacking, but we would be remiss on this channel if we didn't at least entertain the possibility that the reason he is walking away from New York City in this shot is because there isn't a New York City anymore. Or he's about to turn around after a few steps and unleash hell. Now, the fact that Lady Liberty is still standing implies Godzilla may have decided not to bother doing to Manhattan what he did to the Ginza district in the last movie. It is possible it could just simply...
Wait, is this still the same Godzilla or the different one? Pretty sure it's a different one because didn't like the original one died? Well, I really don't know guys because I haven't seen Godzilla -1 yet. And the modern art TV show with Rodan and stuff.
Be a matter of dumb luck she didn't get caught in a faraway blast, or some convenient plot armor to make sure the shot looked as good as it could. But hypothetically, if he was putting his back into it, how big of a blast could a Godzilla this size throw out? Now, again, we caution there are a lot of hypotheticals here. Our previous calculation that this Godzilla might have been in excess of 130 and clear into 160 meters tall was based on a camera angle that simply could have been exaggerated for dramatic effect. effect. But let's assume several things are true before we calculate how big of a kaboom we're talking about. We'll assume the mechanics behind the explosive aspect of the breath work and scale like real nuclear weapons when talking blast radius or energy yield. 2. That our new Godzilla genuinely is about 160 meters tall and his energy output scaled proportionately. 3. We'll assume the Ginza explosion was Goji putting his back into it, but wasn't his absolute maximum power. And 4. We'll assume the reactions involved more closely resemble fusion bombs instead of fission ones. There's an...
Just imagine that ain't actually his full power when he saw it at that city. That would be amazing, but also bad for the people. Because that much radiation poison.
Important difference, and we need to explain this before we proceed with -0 lighting up New York City. Fusion bombs, like the hydrogen bomb, were first thought up as far back as the Manhattan Project by Dr. Edward Teller, but they weren't tested until the 1950s with the terrifying-looking IV Mike test. Now, we could give you a full rundown by Dr. Goji on how the physics of these two kinds of nuclear devices work, but to be brief, the main difference is how they handle radioactive material. We'll tie this in with -0 in just a bit. Fission bombs have a hypothetical limit of around a few megatons of TNT, and every single one tested was only in the kiloton range. Making them bigger is very ineffective because doubling the size of the bomb doesn't double the blast like it does in fusion bombs, which can be scaled up easily. This is why the fusion bombs like the Castle Bravo test and the Tsar Bomba drastically eclipse the fission bomb effects of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But what if the product of the Manhattan Project decided to turn its fury loose on Manhattan? Let's do some math. In Godzilla -1, Godzilla demonstrated a variable amount of power behind his beam attack. The strongest on screen was the Ginza explosion, which has a lot of different calculations that all could have plenty of validity to them. The novelization of the movie gave a blast range of about 6 kilometers where it pulverized everything it hit and reached temperatures so hot that many structures went through sublimation, where they bypass liquefying and are burned so hot they go from solid straight to gas. Now, this might seem way stronger than it was in the movie, given the wall Shikishima was pushed behind by Noriko survived, and he wasn't flash-fried by the radiating heat. This could simply be a time of film and novelization differed, but there might be a way to explain this discrepancy, and it all has to do with how tall this dude is. The visible horizon for a human at sea level is usually about 4.8 kilometers, but for a much taller 50.1 meter Godzilla, his visible horizon would be about 19 to 25 kilometers, depending on his stance. What makes this even worse is while Godzilla fired, his explosion either happened just above the ground or he was aiming slightly down and did hit the ground. This means the resulting blast counts as a surface explosion instead of an airburst, where the detonation happens high above the target. Not only do surface explosions require substantially more force to have the same kind of blast radius, but these explosions create drastically more nuclear fallout and radiation effects than airbursts, which do most of their deadly damage with the heat and shockwaves. Using the Glasstone-Dolan equations for bomb calculations from their 1977 publication, if we assume Shikishima was on the edge of this 6-kilometer span, depending on if he was in the zone classified as light or moderate blast damage, this would put the yield of the atomic breath explosion between about 250 kilotons and 2.2 megatons. Because our leading man wasn't fried even with cover, and just to give Manhattan a chance, let's assume the Ginza blast was somewhere in the middle at about 0.5 to 1.25 megatons. Fusion bombs use implosion, where a small fission blast sets off a far bigger blast. Because of this, scaling them up with more material actually does have a near one-to-one scaling effect with the resulting explosion. But what about the blast radius? This means there's a fairly clean scaling along the cube route. Plugging in the numbers, 12 kilometers. Viewers of the channel should be well familiar with the square cube law. Double the size, octuple the mass. For bomb blasts, the scaling on a cube route means the inverse. You need to increase the mass 8-fold to double the blast radius, in most cases. So, if -0 Goji was exactly 100.2 meters tall to be doubled up from last time, his nuclear breath attack would have an average yield of about 8 megatons of TNT. Keep in mind, this is just a mid-range average. But what if they really is bigger. Well, if everything scales with square root scaling for size and cube root for blast force, this
So we don't know who is bigger, I think.
Goliath of a Godzilla could fire off a blast of about 32 plus megatons of TNT. Keep in mind, this is a ballpark average and a conservative
Just
one
get
at that.
shallow.
It very easily could be double that blast for a higher estimate. That kind of blast is comparable to the Tsar Bomba, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever tested with around 50 megatons of yield. A blast like that fired at the heart of Manhattan would have a fireball nearly 6 kilometers across, so hot that metal turns to gas. The thermal radiation hot enough to instantly cause third-degree burns would extend halfway through New Jersey, and the shockwaves could be enough to level most everything across Manhattan to Jersey City to Port Washington. A ground burst like that would throw up fallout that could be carried as far north as Maine and Canada, even with moderate winds. People hundreds of miles away would only have maybe a few hours to evacuate before becoming lethally irradiated. Millions would die instantly from a fireball that would blind potentially millions more that very moment. And again, we caution, this is a conservative estimate. The fact the Statue of Liberty is still intact doesn't imply that Godzilla couldn't destroy the heart of the United States if he wanted to. It implies he didn't feel the need to, because it would take them only moments to do it. Even a more comparatively minuscule blast would be far more than enough to likely render most of Manhattan a sea of glass and metal at this scale. Will -0 reduce Manhattan to 0? Comment, subscribe, and don't miss the next -1 episode we have in store. If not, it's fine. Your TV might not survive the blast.
Okay. Yeah, my TV might not survive the blast, but why is there a skull collar there? Like, is -0 gonna go to Skull Island? Like, that might be a video for your idea. It's gonna sound amazing, but I don't know if King Kong is gonna be too happy with that. Goodbye, guys.